Hi, my name is Jamie Mathias, and I'm a third grade teacher in Linden, Washington. I'm going to be talking a little bit today about William Bennett and essentialism. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, if you give me 1 second. All right, we're going to be talking about William Bennett today, as well as essentialism. So I wanted to start off my presentation here with what is essentialism? Essentialism in education argues that schools are academic institutions that consist of fundamental skills. Essentialists emphasize that classroom curriculum should provide a roadmap to teach basic skills and subjects. Teachers should teach to verifiable standards, and school is a place of order, discipline, and effective instruction. The ultimate goal of public education is to prepare people for productive, civil, and patriotic lives. The theory of essentialism is rooted in idealism and realism. Its main purpose is to educate a competent person that will add to American society and, culture and the economy. The curriculum is straightforward, so it's math, literacy, social studies, science, history, and art. The educational implications are cultural maintenance. So it's basically an unchanging theory. The goal is rooted in keeping things as traditional as possible. The main proponents are Candell, Bagley, and Bestor. The history of essentialism. I think it's important that we start off with the history of essentialism because I think that's going to give you a little bit more information on William Bennett. So the history of essentialism, the metaphysics is, the reality is the world of unchanging ideas. The epistemology is knowing and observing through understanding. The axiology is that values are absolute and they're based on enduring ideas. The educational implications are that the curriculum focuses on basic skills and standards. The history of essentialism began in the 19th century where common schools were implemented. These schools were created just to teach students basic literacy skills, just to read and write. They wanted these students to be able to go back out into the world and to contribute to society. So they needed to be able to read and write to do that. They called these basic skills the 3 R's, which I think is kind of funny. Obviously, they don't start all with R. But reading, writing, and arithmetic. This essentialism also focuses a lot on patriotism and mental discipline, mental toughness. The essentialism movement was superseded by William Bagley. He argued that progressivism was essentially ruining the American schools. And it was doing so by relaxing the standards. And it was also, it was also promoting play and providing students to what he felt like was too much choice. In essentialism, the role of the teacher is that it's teacher-centered and lecture-based. Lessons always revolve around standards that cover the same basic strategies with language arts, mathematics, science, history, art, and language. The teacher is extremely knowledgeable. She's a master of her craft, and she's able to transfer knowledge easily to the student. She's able to transfer basic skills to maintain the perpetuation of society. She's also able to teach in a logical sequence, one that's outlined in a basic curriculum. The student's role is to be very compliant and orderly. They're expected to participate and give a lot of effort, and they're disciplined. As essentialism evolved, so did progressivism and the progressive movement. In the 1950s, essentialism was either completely adopted by a school or it was rejected in a public school. And if it was rejected, it was likely due to the fact that the progressive movement was moving in. So, the nation at risk was something that was talked about a lot by Ronald Reagan. And basically, he was saying that the progressive movement was ruining the American school and that we needed to get back to the basics in public education. So he set forth the Nation at Risk, which was set to improve the quality of basic public education, to increase teacher expectations, and pair educations with the needs of the economy. He also wanted to reduce violence by increasing strict behavior standards within the classroom. The Basic Education Revival. This attracted outside influence, and this is where William Bennett comes in. Outside influence other than educators, so politicians and people who wanted to make a difference in the education system. They saw that it was the trajectory was moving downward, and they wanted to help. So they wanted to get back to the basics, and it was a slogan that showed criticism of public education. So they wanted to hold students accountable to really high standards, and they believed that they needed to get back to the basics to do that. That brings me to William Bennett. So now that we know a little bit about essentialism and a little bit about the history of essentialism, we know that essentialism and the progressive movement were kind of butting heads. And this was when Ronald Reagan was president. And so Ronald Reagan, he, I guess, voted to have the Secretary of Education come in, who was William Bennett. William Bennett was born on July 31st in 1943 in Brooklyn, New York. He was a philosopher. He had his doctorate in philosophy, and he was a teacher of philosophy. He also was very invested in education, and so he served as the third Secretary of State under the Ronald Reagan's presidency. He was the author of 25 books. He was an advocate for Common Core and strict curriculum. He was a conservative politician, and he was a Secretary of Education. His contributions to education. He believed in education. He was passionate about education. He was one of the most important and influential and respected voices regarding educational issues. He believed that teaching discipline, morals, and pride for our country was the duty of the educator. So while he didn't, create essentialism, he really perpetuated essentialism in the modern day. So he worked tirelessly towards school vouchers and supported the Common Core curriculum. He also sought education reform. So his main contributions, I'm just going to list a few because he did a lot. So like I said, he was a Secretary of Education under Ronald Reagan. One of his quotes that I really liked was that elementary school has no small place in a child's life. After all, indeed, except for the family, there is no institution so influential. That really resonated with me, and it showed how passionate he is, especially for laying the foundational skills for young students. In 1988, he wrote the James Madison Elementary School, a curriculum for American students. This was interesting because the James Madison Elementary School was a fictitious school, and he wrote a curriculum for them, which was obviously before the 2009 implementation of the Common Core. This just showed how much he valued having a common curriculum that outlined a strict sequence of content to be taught to students. He really believed in it, and he wrote this sequence very thoroughly in a 63-page suggestion from the United States Secretary of Education. I took a picture of it here because I thought it was really neat. It doesn't get very specific. It's pretty broad, but I really like how he laid this out here. So go ahead and take a peek for that. If you want to pause the video, go ahead and do so. He was also a distinguished author. In 1993, he published the Book of Virtues, which was one of his most famous and popular books. It was intended to teach children values, obviously something that is super important with essentialism. I also love this quote that he wrote in his book. responsibility, courage, compassion, honesty, friendship, persistence, and faith. Everyone recognizes these traits as essentials of good character. In order for our children to develop such traits, we have to offer them examples of good and bad, right and wrong, and the best places to find them in great works of literature and exemplary stories from history. He also wrote The Educated Child and Is College Worth It? In 2013, he endorsed the Common Core. He also added, which I thought was really interesting, that he thinks that the Common Core is good, but he also believed it was important to read great books that had shaped our country and formed our culture. And those great books are like Shakespeare, the Bible, and great books of Western culture. So now that you know a little bit about William Bennett and essentialism, I'm going to pose 2 discussion questions to you. My discussion questions are: how much of your educational experience was derived from essentialism? Do you agree or disagree that the core ideas of essentialism support learning? Why or why not? Do you believe that teaching specific content, like math, language arts, social studies, science, art, and language, in American schools is essential? Why or why not? Thank you so much for hanging with me for the last little bit and learning a little bit about William Bennett.